right, so we've been talking today, Joe, about Justin Fields being named the starter of the Bears going forward. What's the effect? What effect does that have on the Bears in Vegas?
So I talked to a couple bookmakers about this a couple weeks ago when Fields was getting that start at Cleveland in place of an injured Andy Dalton. And I wanted to know what the difference was to the point spread. And essentially, it was nothing. There was no movement whatsoever. If anything was going to happen, it was going to be because maybe the Chicago public was really excited about backing him, or maybe the opposition was really excited about betting against him. But the reality was the bookmakers didn't see much of a difference between Dalton and Fields. That's not to say Fields isn't any good, but for all the talent he may have that surpasses Andy Dalton, the experience is going to be the thing that brings them back together. So now here we are in a game against the Raiders. Raiders opened 4 for this game at the beginning of the week. They are now a 5.5-point favorite. So it is Raider money that's been coming in on the market after the news that Justin Fields would be the starter. As good as the Bears may have looked last week against Detroit, keep this in mind. That Bears offensive line is brutal. And as Keyshawn can tell you, bad offensive lines get exposed on the road. We saw it with the Bears at Cleveland. We could see it against the Raiders this weekend. So the money coming in on the silver and black for week 5.
Joe, what line are you absolutely staying away from this week?
There are a handful. The NFL is really tightening up. We've got a few weeks under our belt now. We have an understanding of who looks good, who doesn't. One that originally jumped out to me that I liked was catching 4 points with Philadelphia at Carolina. I think a lot of people were watching the Panthers early in the season. We saw this great defense. We were all very excited about what they were doing. And then they got shellacked at Dallas. And you realized perhaps the defense was built up a little bit on the fact that they hadn't really played anybody. So now they go and they get beat by Dallas. They get sent to host Philadelphia. There might be some value on the Eagles. But then 2 things happen. Stephon Gilmore gets traded to Carolina, although it doesn't look like he's going to play this week. But we heard the same thing about Richard Sherman in that game between the Patriots and the Buccaneers, and he ended up starting. And then at the same time, Christian McCaffrey is back at practice right now. So I'm staying away from that matchup at the moment. I like the Eagles originally. Now I've got to pause. We'll see what happens. If you're going to play it, though, you got to play it at 3.5 or better.
Joe, I got to ask you about this Denver matchup versus the Steelers. Obviously, a lot of stuff around Big Ben, whether he can move in the pocket. That O-line is tough. Broncos, what happens with Teddy Bridgewater? Concussion protocol. It's -1. I mean, they're a 1-point favorite for Pittsburgh, games in Pittsburgh. What do you think?
Yeah, so a lot of variables with this game, which you touched on. The key is going to be the health of Teddy Bridgewater. Much more conservative Denver offense with him in there, better protecting the football than Drew Lock. Last year with Drew Lock as the starting quarterback, Denver was dead last in turnover differential and number 1 in giveaways. Very sloppy with the football. That's not all on Lock, but as the quarterback, a lot of that's going to be on Lock. So Bridgewater gets the job because he's playing behind a great defense. They can run the football a little bit. They're in a situation where they need a quarterback who can move the sticks and manage games, and Teddy brings that to him. But now that there's uncertainty regarding his health, whether or not he's going to play this weekend, you see some of this in flux. I'm hesitant to do anything with the Steelers at this point because last week we were talking about that game against the Packers. And the Packers at one point were a 7-point favorite, and then Steeler money started coming in. Knocked it down to 6.5, knocked it down to 6, and you thought to yourself, this might be the game where Pittsburgh gets right. And then they go out and they play dreadful football again. I mean, how much more do we need to see from Pittsburgh before we realize they're not a good football team? They can't play the quarterback position. They can't move the ball with consistency. They can't score with consistency. And in a lot of these games, they're really struggling to get anything going. So unders would be the play for me. The total has been dipping because this is going to be 2 good defenses with offenses who might struggle to move the ball down the field. Total's very low, but I'd be looking to the under here.
What's the best play tonight in tonight's game?
All right, so this is a tricky one because the Rams opened as a very small underdog for this game, depending on where you looked. It was Seattle -1. It's been nothing but Rams money, moving this thing all the way to Rams -2.5. So you're talking about laying close to a field goal on the road, short week, Thursday night, and of all places, you're doing it in Seattle with that hostile environment. But all that being said, look at what the Rams and Sean McVay have done when they come off a loss. McVay has been a wizard at getting his teams to bounce back. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think in his history as the head coach of the Rams, he's something like 13-4 coming off a loss He's profitable against the spread, and he's winning these games by an average of just shy of 9 points per game. That's how much he's outscoring the opposition. So they have done a really nice job bouncing back. And I can't help but think there's trouble in paradise with Seattle. I know they won last week against San Francisco. That, to me, was more the Niners giving that game away with horrible decision-making than it was Seattle taking it from them. They needed to go out and make those plays, but there are issues on the Seattle defense. There are issues on offense, especially when the third quarter starts. They finally got right against the Niners, but they have not come out of the half and played very well. And I'm wondering at what point we're going to start questioning whether or not Pete Carroll's the man for the job moving forward. That's probably going to be a discussion further down the line if Seattle continues to slip up. I do like the Rams tonight. It's not one of my favorite plays, but I would play the Rams, and I'd also look a little bit to the under here. I don't know that the Rams are going to have an explosive offensive performance with that crowd noise, and I don't know how much Seattle's going to be able to get going up against that Ram defense who was just humiliated by Kyler Murray and the Cardinals last week.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.